In this chapter, we're going to be going over Chapter 6, Strategic Management. It's continuing on with the strategy aspect that we talked about from Chapter 5. Now, again, one of the things to think about is what is it that makes an effective strategy? And one of the keys is going to be how you're positioning your organization within that market. There's different levels of strategy. You have your corporate level, your business level, and then your functional level strategies. When you start thinking about the different levels of strategy, your corporate level strategy is basically looking at what business are we really in, okay? Which is kind of the mission that goes along with that. Then you have your business level strategies, your functional level strategies, and even strategies below that. So for example, let's say we're talking about Hallmark cards. Hallmark is looking at what kind of business are they in, which is primarily communications and social expression. Then you start looking at the different business level strategies. Now, the business levels that they might have might be cards, gift wrap, ornaments. So they have different businesses basically within that corporation. Then you break it down to that functional level strategy. So you might have, how are we actually going to finance all of the things that we're doing as far as cards are concerned? Who are the people that we're going to have there? And then you can take it down even lower as far as, okay, so maybe we're talking about operations. So maybe you have a strategy for the embossing and the die cutting parts of manufacturing for those cards. So there's going to be different levels of strategy depending upon the things that need to happen. Remember, we talked about before how the goals and the strategy for one level become the goals, and then the strategies for the next level, which then become the goals and strategy. Everything needs to be aligned and everything cascades down. In the last chapter, we talked about the strategic management process. We're going to go into a little bit more detail on that now. See, first of all, you need to make sure that you're clear about your mission. Your mission statement and your mission are basically different. The mission is the thing that lives in people's heads. In other words, what business are we in? What are we really trying to accomplish? The mission statement is the thing that you put up on the wall for public consumption. And it might have information like, okay, so who are our customers? What are our products? What are the economic objectives that we have? Things like that. So your mission statement is basically answering these kinds of questions. You also need to make sure that you're clear about your vision and your vision statement. The vision is the thing that lives in people's hearts. The vision statement is the thing that you put up on the wall. And so the vision is something that people can really see themselves in that better future so that they're working towards that. Your vision statement might have things like, what kind of purpose and direction are we doing? Is it well articulated and easily understood so that everybody knows what that vision of that better future really is? And your values. The organization needs to make sure that they're clear on their values and what it is that's important to them. Will it be unchanging? Are they expressed and really stomped by the senior management of the organization? And do you hold everybody accountable to living those values? In step 2, what you're doing is you're assessing the current reality. What is it that's actually going on within our industry, outside of our industry, that sort of thing. One of the key tools that's used in looking at the scanning and looking at what's outside is what's called environmental scanning and using what's called a SWOT. Now, a SWOT analysis is this: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. That's where your SWOT comes from. Strengths and weaknesses are things that are internal to the organization. These are things that the organization can control. Opportunities and threats are things outside the organization. These are things that the organization cannot control, cannot do anything about. One of the things that you really need to focus in on is what's called your strengths. What is it that you do well? What do you do better than anybody else? And then you want to think about your weaknesses. Are these things that we can avoid? Or are there things in here that we can fix? One of the learnings I've taken from Barnett Helzberg of Helzberg Diamonds was always focus on your strengths. You can work on your weaknesses and to fix those. If all you do is try to fix your weaknesses, that takes you only to mediocrity. It's focusing on and utilizing and leveraging those strengths that really takes you to greatness. When you start looking outside, you're looking at the opportunities that you can take advantage of and the threats that you need to avoid. What you do is you use your strengths to leverage the opportunities that you have. You may need to use your strengths in order to avoid some of those threats or to make some other changes on things that may be going along. So the SWOT analysis is something that's really key for organizations to utilize. You can utilize this in your own private life and your career also. What are the strengths that you bring to the party? What is it that you do really well and better than somebody else? What are some of the weaknesses that you may want to start working on? The thing is, you want to use your strengths to try to take advantage of the opportunities that are out there that are available to you. So the SWOT analysis is a nice key that really does help organizations and individuals as far as putting together their strategy and what is it they're going to do going forward. This is an example of maybe the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats for like a college campus. In other words, it talks about, the faculty that they have and the alumni and things like that. Maybe some limited programs, high teaching loads. Then you have external opportunities. What are some things that they can use their strengths, their faculty teaching and things, in order to help the high school students who are taking college classes, for example? What are some threats, things that are outside the organization that are impacting or could possibly impact the organization? Things like funding, okay? A decline in some of the enrollments of all the students, things like this. Viro is another tool that you might be able to use. It's basically something where you're trying to determine the competitive strategic questions by answering the thing that we're doing. Does it provide value? Is it valuable to somebody else? Is it rare? In other words, we're the only ones who can do it, or there are very few organizations that can do it. Is it costly for others to try to imitate it or emulate it, try to do the same thing? And does the organization have the resources and the capability to do the things that you're trying to do? In analyzing what's happening around you, you also have to think about forecasting. What is actually going to be happening into the future? We need to look into our little crystal ball and figure out, okay, so what's going to happen down the road? A lot of times what we do is what's called trend analysis. What's been happening in the past, and is that going to continue in the future? If we've had past growth of 5%, are we going to continue having growth of 5%? Contingency planning is looking at, okay, so if things go south, what is it that we're going to do differently? What is it that we can do? Right now, a lot of organizations are going through contingency planning. Right now, we have the COVID virus that's actually happening, and it's impacting a lot of companies and schools. And one of the things that they're doing is their contingency planning. In other words, if we can't open until such and such a date, what are we going to do? And so it's kind of stepping back and saying, okay, we will be prepared if this happens because we have a plan that's ready to go. Benchmarking is where you're actually comparing yourself to somebody else and finding what it is that they're doing really well that you might be able to emulate. In step 3, what you're doing is you're actually putting together your grand strategy. All right. It's formulating and putting together that strategy and then communicating that throughout the organization. You basically have 3 key basic strategies: growth, stability, and defense. Growth, stability, and defense. Growth strategies might be things like increasing our marketing efforts to try to improve the market share that we have, or maybe expanding operations. We're going to open a new location. It may be new products and services, or maybe acquiring another company or merging with another company. So there's different growth strategies on how we can actually grow the business more than what we've been doing in the past. The stability strategy is where you're going to say, okay, we're going to do basically the same thing that we've done in the past. May have been that you were growing way too fast, and now one of the things you need to do is step back a little bit and just let everything else kind of catch up to where it is that you need to be. Defensive strategy is where you're saying, okay, we have a real problem that's going on here. What are we going to do to stay competitive? It could be reducing costs or selling off assets, things like this. Last resort may be bankruptcy. Various large department stores have recently gone through bankruptcy. Recently, Sears, JCPenney's, things like that. Another tool that's available to you is what's called the BCG matrix, okay, the Boston Consulting Group matrix. Basically, it's where you are comparing your market share, your current market share, with what kind of growth is there in that market. If you have a product where you have high market share and low growth, you basically have a cash cow. So, for example, maybe there's cars that have been out there for a while, say the Ford Escape. The Ford Escape has grown quite a bit. It has a pretty good market share as far as that segment of the automobile industry. Low growth at this point because there's actually the growth that's in other areas, but they're making some great money as far as selling Escapes, okay, or Escorts. If you have high market share, you have a lot of the market share, and it's growing like crazy, that's a star. That's where you want to make sure that you're putting all your money, as much money as possible into it. Get the profits as long as you can. If you don't have much in the way of market share, but that market is growing quite a bit, that's a question mark. You have to think about how much can we invest in this product to see if it's actually going to become a star. Then you have your dogs. Okay, you have low market share and that market is not growing at all. For example, today, newspapers are losing market share like crazy, and there's no growth as far as the market is concerned. And so dogs, you want to get rid of. You want to get out of those businesses. You could also diversify. In other words, one of the things that you can do is bring in other products that may be related or unrelated to your business as a part of that business. For example, let's say that you're doing sodas, you're doing soft drinks. You might bring in snack goods or something. It's something that's kind of related, but not completely. It's not really in the soft drink industry, but it helps diversify because when people think about sodas, they also think about munchies. Then you have your vertical integration. In other words, let's say that you have a grocery and you decide to invest in a bunch of farmers' fields, purchase a bunch of large farms. That's vertical integration so that they are supplying the things that you need. Michael Porter actually identified the key forces that are impacting organizations and the things that we need to think about in order to stay competitive. The first force is the competitive rivalry. In other words, what kind of rivalry is going on within the competition, within that industry between the players? You then have to think about the threat of new entrants. In other words, here you are, you're in an industry and it's growing like crazy and stuff like this. And so all of a sudden there's a new company that comes in, maybe with some big bucks, that is trying to take some of that market share. For example, many years ago, when personal computers were first coming out, at first, PCs were basically toys. They were hobbyists. In other words, you had Texas Instruments, you had Radio Shack, where people might build their own little computer and things like this. And then all of a sudden, IBM came out with their PC and they blew everybody away. Nobody was thinking about that new entrant. There's also the threat of substitution. So, for example, let's say you're talking about workout equipment for home. Substitution might be something like 24-hour fitness. Why spend the money on a home gym when you can just go to 24-hour fitness for much less? Threat of substitution. Then you have buyer and supplier power to think about. In other words, maybe you have a supplier that's a big person, big company, and they can control what it is that they charge you for buying their stuff. They have a lot of power. Buyer power, let's say that you are selling your goods to other companies. And there's this one company that's huge, and they can control what it is that they pay for your products. For example, Walmart is huge on that. They can really push down the prices that they charge in their stores because they really put the heat on their suppliers. You have basically 4 competitive strategies. Okay, you can have cost leadership, differentiation, cost focus, or a focus differentiation. Cost leadership is basically where you're saying we're going to be charging much less than anybody else for a wide market. Example is Walmart. Walmart utilizes primarily a cost leadership strategy. Then you have the differentiation strategy. In other words, how are we different from anybody else? What is it that we bring that's unique and superior to a wide market? Apple has done a phenomenal job as far as a differentiation strategy. They do that with their iPhones, with their iPads, things like that. Then you have your cost focus strategy, where basically you're trying to be below your competition, but it's a pretty narrow market that you're really going for. Example of that would be BMW. In other words, they're going for more of the high-end market, but they're charging less than some of the others. Then you have the focused differentiation strategy. Unique and superior value. It's going to be expensive, and it's a very narrow market. Example of that would be Mercedes-Benz. So you have those basic 4 strategies. In step 4, you need to execute. In other words, what you're doing is you're actually putting those strategies into place. You are getting rid of the roadblocks that stopping the company from doing the things that are necessary. You have your control systems to make sure that things stay on track. Execution is always key. All right. You can do all kinds of great planning. If you're not executing well, you're going to fail. In order to execute well, you need to know your people and your business. You need to set your goals and priorities and make sure they understand what's going on. Follow through on accountability and results. Hold people accountable for the results that they're getting. Reward those that do it. Make sure you're doing the development and helping people expand their capabilities, their new skills and knowledge, and then know and understand yourself, what it is that you as an organization do well. And then in step 5, what you're doing is you're maintaining control. This is where that feedback comes back that says, okay, here's what we planned, here's what the actual is, here's what we need to do differently. In your business, you basically have 3 core processes that you need to think about in that control aspect. You have your people, your strategy, and your operations. Do you have the right people on the bus, making sure things get done? Do you have the right strategy that will help you achieve the goals that are necessary? And are your operations working well so that you can actually execute well? And here's the questions that you need to think about. Do you have a strong strategic plan? So, for example, what is the assessment of the external environment? Again, you're going through and you're looking at your SWOT analysis. You're looking at Viro. You're looking at the BCG matrix and things like this. How well do you understand your customers? That's important. Many times, customers can be very fickle. What's the best way to grow that business profitably? Who are you really competing against? Can you execute the strategy that you're putting together? Have you balanced the short and long term? You do not want to destroy the long term just for current profits. What are the milestones that need to be met in order to execute the plan? What are some of the critical issues that the company faces? And how are you going to make money on a sustainable basis? So these are some of the key questions and some of the key points from the chapter. If you have questions, give me a shout.